I actually came from this university. I walked in here in 2010. So I will talk about some of the few jobs that I've done. For some reason, showbiz really impresses people. Once you are in showbiz, you know that it's a lot of hard work. Whilst in university, I always said to myself, I probably won't be in showbiz, I want to do serious journalism, until I actually got into showbiz and realized it's a lot of hard work. It can be a lot of sleepless nights if you are working with LA clients, because they're awake at a different time. So I've bought pictures, because I remember when I was in university, I did, before I actually landed my jobs and when I said I was doing nothing per se, I set up my own publication called Dream Nation, the DN, with 2 other friends. And I was doing that for about 2 years while looking for that big job that I really wanted. Dream Nation was really to just inspire people to go for their dreams. It was what we were going through as graduates, trying to land that perfect job that we wanted. And doing that job, I ended up being invited to the MOBO Awards to do interviews there. I wasn't behind a big publication at this point. I was just me, Tobi, Rachel, being invited to do these things and acting like I was the biggest deal in showbiz. And that's a lot of the things that you have to do when you are working in journalism. It doesn't have to be show business, of course. If you're in news or politics and you're being invited to the House of Commons for the very first time, so this was my first time on a red carpet. So if you are being invited to a room where you feel out of place, don't let anyone know about it. Like, act like you deserve to be in the room, and that's how you get those jobs. So obviously people noticed that I was doing a bit of that. They thought I was a big shot because I was acting like a big shot, and I was hired to actually eventually be relatively a big shot. I still don't think I am one. Game of Thrones, I'm a huge nerd for Game of Thrones, so I definitely barged my way into the set to interview the cast, and I knew that the show was ending recently, so I made sure I got to do that. You know, to tell my grandkids that this huge show that was on television, I was a part of that. Idris Elba, who Sharon has mentioned, and the wonderful thing about, it's kind of weird because I have Idris in my phone book, or his wife per se, because he changes his number all the time. And yeah, stuff like that doesn't faze you after a while, and I really hope that for anyone that wants to get into journalism, that you get to a stage where it doesn't faze you and you start chasing the new things that faze you. So yeah, I've interviewed Idris twice. He's lovely, he invites us all for dinner and stuff. Bryan Cranston, I don't know if you guys watch Breaking Bad at all. The Breaking Bad movie's coming out, Silence, maybe that is before your time. But anyway, he's a great actor, one of the best. And you know, he's Oscar elite. So getting these interviews, even though you are in a huge publication, you still have to bust your ass to get those interviews. You still have to prove to the likes of Idris that I deserve to be the person to have the exclusive interviews. So it's stuff like talking to him at dinner and telling him I really understand his struggle and stuff like that. You know, you wing it. And again, the middle picture actually was a time when I wasn't working, just before I did land the big jobs, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I hate the little byline they gave me, trolled on Twitter, because it was more than that. But there was a time when, it's a very long story, I was trolled on Twitter by a racist, and I was very upset about it, and I express myself through words. I'm sure a lot of you guys in this room are like that. So I decided to open up a Medium, medium.com, and write an open letter to the troll. He lost his job, sadly, boo-hoo. And, but it was picked up by a lot of publications that I now work for. So they saw my writing, me writing for myself on what I thought was just a measly blog, but it went viral and people picked it up, and those same people they would like me to work for them till this day. So it's like me giving myself an opportunity to stay visible, which is very, very important. Stay visible in whatever you do. And, you know, like Terry said, you have your phones, you have the internet, you have so much more than what people 20 years had. Like, you have all the opportunities on this. You don't even need a laptop. So yeah, I ended up on the news talking about it for some time. I still get invited to talk about it, but I've decided to stop because I'm so much more than the girl that was trolled on Twitter. This is me accidentally ending up on BBC with Craig David. I was supposed to be backstage and I ended up in the shot. So my mum finds it hilarious. And a lot of red carpet stuff that I do in the cold, I must say. And some more red carpet stuff. I like to involve myself in like history making moments, and you have to fight within your colleagues as well I'm a nerd, so I love the bloody Avengers, so I had to be there. And Michael B. Jordan, I have wanted to marry him for a few years, so I have interviewed him. He didn't propose, but I'm working on it. He's got a movie coming out very soon. And Aquaman, that's Jason Momoa's car getting into my Instagram shot, and I was very upset about it. So I don't know, who watched Love Island here? Good, a good handful of people. So for me, when Love Island was on, I decided, okay, I'm gonna find out the PRs for these islanders because they're gonna be hella famous. I can see it. I was watching Ovi, I was like, this guy is gonna get all the deals. Saw Jordan, I was like, Jordan's not gonna last for very long. No offense to anyone who may be related to Jordan in here, because that tends to happen. I walk into rooms where someone's related to someone. And yes, I thought, okay, Jordan is most likely to want to talk to me. So I invited her in for the second episode of my podcast, Yellow Cup Podcast. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna get her to spill all the tea about what goes on in Love Island. At the time, Love Island's the biggest thing. While working in the newsroom, I would look at the statistics of like the Google Trends and stuff like that. You can access Google Trends yourself. Just type in Google Trends in Google, and you can see what is the big hitter online. And that is a great way to see what people want to read, especially when you're in online journalism. So I saw that Ovi's name was trending a lot online all the time. And Jordan can give me some tea. She had just left Love Island, and I knew she'll be fame hungry. So I invited her into a studio that I got. And she did spill all of the tea for about an hour and 20 minutes. And that ended up as headline news. So this is one of the clippings from, this is The Sun. So obviously, whether you like The Sun or not, you know there are major leaders in the news. So our conversation then translated into headline news. So that's kind of like what I'm working on now, making sure that I get those personal, big hitting exclusives. Tips that I would leave you guys with is to stay ready. So for me, when I did land a few jobs as a freelancer, they don't give you time to prepare. They don't give you time to, you're gonna be a sports journalist, to research. So I was a sports journalist, believe it or not, around 2012 for the Olympics. When I walked into The Guardian, I had to act like I knew everything about the Premier League. So I stayed reading. I haven't read about the Premier League ever since, but because I knew that I was going in there, I stayed very, very ready. My passion is movies. I studied film while I was here, which enables me to be a film critic whenever I'm called to be so. So for example, I definitely wanted to be part of history when Black Panther was out, the Marvel movie. So networking sideways is very, very important. Obviously, everybody knows to network upwards, and still network upwards, but networking sideways is very, very important. Stay visible, as I have mentioned already. How many of you guys are on social media? So you have absolutely no excuse to use your social media to stay extremely visible. There are many student journalists who I have become aware of on my timeline, and I think, yeah, I definitely want to work with them when they graduate. Improve yourself 1% every day, which is an extension really of staying ready. For me personally, I still do that. So as you guys know, I'm now doing my Yellow Cup podcast, which is a podcast, and I have to improve myself 1% every day because I wasn't doing podcasts before. It's my first time, so I'm continually listening to podcasts as I was reading a lot prior. I'm still reading a lot, but it's almost second nature for me. My favorite point is the final one. So if you're going to write down one thing, write down improve yourself 1% every day. But that is me, and yeah, thank you very much.
if you are naturally creative, and I assume everybody here is, you will have to do it. And you don't know when you're doing it because it comes naturally to you. It's just like being a musician or a footballer or a boxer. If you have this particular gene, you may as well know that you're going to be doing it for the rest of your lives in some form or other. You're stuck with it. And so as you are stuck with this gene, you should have a good time. Because if you have a good time in what you're doing, you will do good work. And you will make a very interesting life. And I think to be able to have an interesting life is a great privilege. So I thought I'd just say a word about myself very briefly, and then we'll talk about you. I started in this business with a school magazine. I was 14, 15 at the time, and one of 4 or 5 students at a school, and we created a magazine. It wasn't really a magazine, it was 10 sheets of paper with the word magazine on the first one. And we produced it on an old-fashioned machine called a Gestetner, and we thought we were really in the magazine business. The English teacher, who took an interest in us, said, you really need to find out something about newspapers and magazines. I see what I can do for you. And he arranged for us to go and see the local newspaper for the whole day. And we went along, and we started in the morning, went through the day, it was press day, and finally we saw the newspaper come off the machine late at night. And I walked home that night with tomorrow's newspaper under my arm, and I thought it was magic. Absolute magic. And that is what I was going to do. And I would try and be a famous journalist and get a big story, stop the machine, get the front page, and hopefully get the girl at the same time. I left school at 16. And when I left, I realized I knew nothing other than this one day at a newspaper. And my parents were very keen that I shouldn't have done that. And they wanted me, obviously, to get a proper job. And I didn't want a proper job. I wanted to be in, the word media didn't even exist at that time. I wanted to be in the press. And somehow or other, I saw a tiny little advertisement in the back of a classified newspaper, and it said, junior required, telephone number. That was it. They obviously spent a lot of money trying to get me. I applied for the job. They said, you better come tomorrow, don't be late. And I arrived in Bond Street in London. I had never been to Bond Street. And I went to this advertising agency, and they said, tell us about yourself. I told them not a lot because I hadn't done that much. And the man who owned the business said, as you're the only one who's applied, we'll give you a go. And if you're hopeless, you'll have to leave at the end of the month. Do I make myself clear? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, Monday, 9 o'clock, don't be late. And as I was leaving, he said, can you type? And I said, no, I can't type, but I'll learn. And that was the beginning of what I'm still doing. The only difference is I'm a much older version than that very first day. But they gave me a chance. And one of the things I try very hard to do all through my career is to give tomorrow's talent a chance. Because you may have in you something more than you realize at this stage in your life. But old people like me, we can recognize talent. And if you can get the right talent, you can produce a newspaper, a magazine, a radio station, a television series of programs, things on the internet, online, whatever. Storytelling is what my life has always been about. We have to be good storytellers. And I think storytelling is fun. Whatever the story is, that's what you need to be able to do. You also need to know a great deal about how to reach people. And you should be nosy. If you see a drama going on somewhere in the street, go and find out what it is. Because it could be the biggest story you have fallen over that you could imagine. And of course, the great thing now is that we have one of these. So we become our own photographers. But I'm really very hopeful for all of you, because they can't replace you with a robot. Because robots are not original thinkers. But human beings are. The very first time I went to America to work was in 1969. And there was an incredible man I worked with called Richard Deems. And he used to say to me, "Doesn't matter where you come from, Terry Mansfield, it's where you're going. That's what matters." Now at that time, people in this country were not saying that in the same way. I found it so empowering in my head, what he was saying to me, that everything is possible, all you have to do is work for it, that it gave me such ambition. And it's true. The more we find out about things, the more we want to do more. And this whole thing of storytelling and learning is incredibly important to be one of the fundamental things of yourself. The other thing, as I've said just a moment ago, is to enjoy what you do. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, go and do something else somewhere else. Now, the biggest problem I encounter with people of your generations is how to get the first job, how to get known, how to show your creativity. Please do not send me a CV that makes you look like wanting to be an accountant. So many people are told there have to be a standardized CV. How can crazy people like me just make a decision on you if it all looks the same and all looks boring? I want you to stimulate me, for me to send an email or make a phone call and say you better come in. If you want to be in the fashion business, why don't you put your CV on a t-shirt? If you want to be in the magazine business, create yourself a magazine for yourself, or a newspaper. If you want to be in the television business, make some form of podcast to give a feel about yourself. That's what we're looking for. And the other thing you must remember is we are actually looking for talent. The media business is a very, very competitive business. We want talented you because we're in a very competitive business. So people make things happen. You also need to take an interest, obviously, in technology. Technology is moving so fast. You know, I worked in magazines at the time when a color page was a treat. There was a magazine that a certain person in this room will remember very clearly, where we celebrated because we put 4 pages of color in the magazine. But we still need storytellers. We still need people that can have an original idea, an original thought, and an original magazine. And I am transfixed by what 14 and 15-year-old people, boys and girls, can do because technology is there to help them. And there are over 27,000 schools in this country, and I only wish we could get applications from all those schools. But we do quite well, and we get several hundred. And it's come a long way. And so have the people. And so many people who are very famous in our business actually started, rather like I did, to do with publishing either a book or a magazine or something when they were very young, and are still doing it. The big issue for you is that you must go and have the widest experience when you have free time. Go into environments which you have never experienced before and write a story about it for yourself, and you can take your own pictures as well. The more you understand about human behavior, the more successful you can be. And we're all curious about each other, aren't we? We all imagine. I'm sure you've sat on a train or a bus or been at an airport and you see these people coming along and you think, I wonder what that person does. Do you think she, does he, etc. Makes life interesting. We're all curious. The other most important thing are contacts. You have to build contacts. And I once was told this by a very famous journalist, that we can lose our money, we can lose our relationships, we can lose everything. But if you have contacts that will take your telephone call, return your email with some positive view, you can reinvent yourself. So it's very, very important to have contacts in whatever sphere you think you want to operate in the media business. Don't assume that what you're going to be doing in the next 5 years is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's not like that. What is going to happen is you think you want to be in magazines, and then you meet somebody and they say, oh, we want somebody like you, and they're in a newspaper or they're on a blog, they're on something, and you go into it, and then, you know, life's a journey. And the more chapters you can add to your journey, the better. Travel, if you can. By traveling, the thing that always happens to me is when I'm traveling and I meet people from another part of the world or wherever, and they want to know what us Brits are worried about, and I tell them, they go, I don't understand any of that. And then they start telling you about their lives, their cultures, their behaviour. I'm involved in a school called Atlantic College. Atlantic College is an international school in Wales, started 50 years ago with the idea that if young people come together for 2 years, they will be here forever. And every year they take young people on scholarship. And I, with Hearst money, have been doing this for some number of years. And 4 years ago I took a young man who was a refugee from a country that doesn't exist now. So I had no passport. And how did we make a choice? That we had a chance of 3 young people. And we made a choice because the young man actually slept outside the offices in the Lebanon in the hope of being seen on time the following day. He came to this country, he was here for 2 years, he is now in his first year at a university in Canada on a full bursary earned by himself. So thank you for listening to me. The most important thing is you're at the beginning, you're creative, and who knows what you're going to be doing in the future. Thank you very much.
Usually when people talk about editors, we think about probably the most famous one at the moment is Anna Wintour. So most people have seen or read The Devil Wears Prada or the September issue, etc. So most people think about that kind of rock star persona of the magazine editor, and a lot of the research has looked into that. But also an editor's role is really to guide trends and report on trends, so they're usually described as a curator or a tastemaker, and increasingly as a brand manager. And so most of my talk, I'm going to talk about that in the modern context, what that might mean for you working in journalism and in magazines. So they're expected to be smart, hard workers, very inspirational. It's quite an aspirational role. So they're a leader of a community of readers, very much so. And often this is as a maternal or paternal figure, but also they're very good business people. But of course the most relevant thing at the moment is that a magazine has changed completely in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 2 years. So even while I've been in London in the last few weeks, Marie Claire has closed. So an iconic magazine that so many people grew up with. I think, Tobi, did you say that you once worked or did some work for Marie Claire? Magazines like Glamour here in Britain closed a year or two ago in the print, in the weekly or monthly print version. So things are changing completely. So they were traditionally very well funded. It was a very glamorous industry with ample staff. And they were the primary resource for information about what's called the 3 R's. So royals, recipes and romance. So if you wanted to know anything that we would now get on primarily on social media, it had to come from a magazine right up until very recently. Also, people used to buy in Britain and Australia particularly, buy their magazines from supermarkets and from newsstands and newsagents. Again, the way we shop has changed completely. So all of these things have impacted on what a magazine is. So a magazine editor now will talk about themselves being a brand manager for a title. And they will say their brand is distributed across multiple channels. So as Tobi has just said, she thinks the future is podcasts. I agree. And some of the case studies that I'll talk about, you'll see where real innovators have made a difference in that kind of area, and in social media as well. It's now very much, rather than waiting for a monthly or a weekly publication to be delivered, it's now, of course, 24/7, 360 degrees. And now magazines are competing with not only newspapers, TV, social media, etc. And we're talking about a completely disrupted environment, which is great for you. So for this Australian case study, I've got a book coming out in the next couple of weeks. So what I wanted to do was to get these stories down in a book, because magazines are disappearing, they're closing all the time. All of the magazines that I grew up with are closing. And all of these iconic editors, I wanted to preserve their stories. So I'm going to start and just give you a little recap of half a dozen of these editors' careers and talk about some of the similar traits that both Terry and Tobi have actually spoken about that I think really make a great editor. So I interviewed 40 editors, and 28 of them are in this book. So Nina King is one of the most famous magazine editors in Australia. She's had TV shows made about her, books have been written about her. She was incredibly successful. So she was selling in the 90s over 1 million copies of a magazine a week, which just is unheard of these days. So some of the traits that really made her a great editor was, unlike today, she had a very long traineeship as a deputy editor underneath another very famous editor called Dulcie Bowling in Australia. When she eventually took the reins of Women's Day as an editor, she just unleashed all of her creativity and just lived for her job. So she was known as a workaholic. She used to go to the supermarkets and talk to all of the readers. So I think that's a really important thing, is to be talking to the people who you want to read your magazines, to know what they're interested in. So whatever the trends are, as Tobi was saying, you need to know what the trends are and to be talking to people about what they're interested in. In Australia, her real talent, she thinks, was for great covers and great cover lines. She was one of the proponents of kind of paparazzi and checkbook journalism, so she would get the best images of everyone, so she would outbid everyone. She was an innovator in cross-platform delivery, which was very different in those days. So some of the things that sound very kind of quaint now, she was an innovator in inserting things into the magazines to make them more of a multi-platform commodity. She was very had a lot of self-belief, and she was very brave. Mia Friedman, a great self-believer, a risk taker. So she was the editor of Cosmo for many years in Australia. Then she moved into TV, and it was a bit of a disaster, and as she'll be the first to say. But then she picked herself up and then started her own company, which is incredibly successful now. She's got 100 employees, she employs other women, she's incredibly passionate about that. Now, she moved into digital years before everyone else, so she could see the writing on the wall, and she was frustrated that that wasn't happening, she thought. And then she moved into podcasts years before anyone else. So she's now got a whole suite of different podcasts. And she's now moved into a really savvy area, I think, which is very short, 15-minute updates, news updates every day. So she says for people who are on the move all the time, very busy, if they can get their news in 15 minutes in a podcast, that's a really effective use of time. And again, she was very committed to leadership and other women. Now, Kejni King is really interesting. Again, unwavering self-belief. She comes from Queensland, which is right in the top of Australia, and the magazine capital in Australia is Sydney. Now, she then studied journalism, so like you, but she knew that making those contacts was the most important thing. So before she graduated, she actually thought, I'm going to have more of a chance if I just stop university, don't graduate, and go and intern. That's what she did. Managed to get into a magazine, ended up becoming the editor of Cosmo. Then she got headhunted by a TV channel. They got her in as a producer in her early 20s. By the time she was 24, she was chief of staff of the particular segment. Incredible person. Now she keeps getting tapped on the shoulder and headhunted. So again, as Terry has mentioned and Toby has mentioned, it's about who you know, making yourself known. So she went into TV, which for someone who grew up wanting to be a magazine editor seemed like a kind of an odd decision at the time. But she could see that the future was video. So she keeps changing jobs and keeps getting promoted. Started her own company, digital company, at about 25. But she's now back in magazines, but working primarily in digital and video. So she will talk a lot of, in magazine land at the moment, people will talk about being platform agnostic. So that means you have content and then you think about the best way to deliver the content rather than thinking, I've got a magazine that I have to fill. So she's a great example of that. So I would say the takeaway messages for you, and there's some overlap here with what Terry and Toby have said. Every editor I spoke to of the 40 editors, I came away from every interview thinking, I cannot believe how hard they worked in their 20s. They would also tell people what you want and make those connections. So networking, as Toby said, obviously create that online profile. All of the really successful women I spoke to were rule breakers and they were really brave. So I would say they would be my takeaway messages for you. And for those of you who are running assignments, etc., these are some of the references about editors, and I'll pass those on to Sharon so you've got them. Thank you.